guys ready? All set? All set? Okay. Pam?
Okay, motion to reconvene.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to reconvene. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, item number 2, public hearing, potential long-term revenue suggestions for the town of Middletown and matters related thereto.
Motion to open a said public hearing on potential long-term revenue suggestions for the town of Middletown.
Second?
Okay, motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming here tonight. I put this on the docket, and my colleagues went along with it, to have this special meeting tonight, to help us look for the future. In January, as a council, we're going to be doing a retreat, where we're going to be meeting with our department heads, and we're going to be brainstorming ways to maintain the same quality of life that we have, which I think it's a great quality of life in Middletown, and at the same token, maintain a tax burden that all our people can afford to pay. So to look forward for the future, I mean, there's only certain things that you can do realistically in towns and cities to raise money. Big thing is property tax and other tax-associated things. But tonight, hopefully, you're going to come up with telling us where a nursery is that we can buy a money tree, or where we can, some ideas that you can come up with off your cuff that maybe help generate some revenue where we can plan for the future more prudently, more financially, and maintain the solvency that we have. I'm gonna do a little something different tonight. I've asked at the last couple of meetings to make sure that people, because it's one of our council rules that they fill out a form prior to the start of the meeting. But tonight, I'm going to waive that a little bit. Anybody that wants to talk will be allowed to talk once, and they're going to have 5 minutes. It'll be on the timer. However, you can raise your hand. I do have a number of papers up here, but you can signify that you'd like to say something by raising your hand. So we're kind of really looking forward to it. I received a lot of emails from people today with some good suggestions, and hopefully we're going to hear things tonight. And what we're going to do, we're going to take it in tonight. The council's not going to decide anything tonight because we're going to be doing a retreat in January, but we're going to be sitting down for a whole day and brainstorming and putting things together for the future of Middletown. So with that, Rocky Kempner. Just when you come up, just your name and address at the mic, please.
Mr. President, members of the council, Robert Kempenaar, 23 Hammersmith Road, Newport, Rhode Island. Well, I guess I wanted to say a little bit about the West Main Road area, which I think is a great opportunity to be developed. I know it's kind of on hold right now, and I think it's very important that I think I understand correctly that you have some money put aside to do a study there to see what you could do. And I just think that it'd be very important to do this as soon as possible before Capianato's development comes to fruition, because I think he's going to be pulling a lot of businesses from Middletown and even some other areas in Newport. So. But I think that's a tremendous opportunity there to try to, get this done now than later. You want to beat him to the punch. So I think that the money that you have to do a study, I think you should start as soon as possible. And I think another opportunity is the Nunes Beachio property, which I think that's still up in the air yet, but I think that can also, put some time into a study there of what they could do there to enhance that area there.
Rocky, what did you say? The beach what?
Chris Beachio
East Main Road.
and John Nunes at that area. I know that they were throwing some things around out there. I think those are two great areas. I mean, it looks a lot better without the billboards that were there that actually was on our old property. So I have to say, I do like it, Art. But anyway, yeah, so they did a great job over there, and Chris did a fine development. So I think there's 15, 16 acres there. I just really think that something special could come out of there, and you want to get it going as soon as possible, I think, because I think he's going to steal a lot from this area when he does that master plan down there, which I think is going to probably be 3 or 4 years. So you really want to get ahead of him. That's kind of about 2 things that I think is great. I think what you're doing down by the beach with the poles, I believe you're still doing it. You're going to put it underground. I think that's going to really help that area there and clean it up. So those are the 3 areas I just think you should focus on. And
Thank you, Rocky.
thank you for your time.
Thanks, Rocky.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rocky.
Okay. Carol Cummins? Carol?
Good evening. Carol Cummings, Indian Avenue. And I'd like to speak on the 2 aspects of what you proposed this evening. Let's just start with the general law of the state of Rhode Island, where it states, as best as I can remember, that all property shall be judged at its full and fair cash value, or at a uniform percentage thereof. The beginning says all property. That means your property, yours, everybody here shall be judged at its, is the singular. Yours singular, yours, and everybody else, singular. Now, what is important is that when you have 2 properties that are side by side, I think, you can give a street price. So everybody's equal, the same street. That's not necessarily the case. You can have 2 pieces of property side by side. One has a view of the water, the other one has none whatsoever. Or there could be a differentiation as to what's in front of each house, which is a lower level. It doesn't make any difference. You can have waterfront property where you have a magnificent view on one aspect and another and another, and they're all assessed according to where they're located at the same price. This is wrong. People need to pay attention to what their neighbors are being assessed for, not only in their neighborhood, but in the other neighborhoods, and in terms of their zoning. People are unaware of this. It's fair for all people to be treated equally, and that is not being done at all. Now let's go to the second aspect that I feel very strongly about, and that has to do with what our wonderful number 45 president has done to us, whereby we can only deduct $10,000 of our personal property tax from our 1040. My feeling is very strong about this. I feel that we can deduct 10, some people are paying 15, 20, 45, 75,000, whatever. It is hurting the economy tremendously. It's hurting people tremendously. And I feel that anything above $10,000 could be and should be given to any given township as a donation. And it says right here, under 1040, local governments may accept donations, but are those donations deductible from the donor's federal income tax? In most cases, yes. And that's what we need to do. We need to really be the first town in the state of Rhode Island, and let it spread throughout the United States, that in fact, the $10,000 and everyone beyond that is a deduction. That's all I've got to say, and I would ask that you all take a look at it, because I feel very strongly about what I've said.
Thank you, Mr. Cummins.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carol.
Okay. Art Weber? Art?
My name is Art Weber. I live at 145 Island Drive. Currently member of the planning board. However, I have a pretty good idea about revenue here because I sat in that seat Mr. Silva's sitting in for 2 years. So I want to talk about 3 things tonight. Where our tax revenue comes from, how it's allocated, and an idea to improve where we can get some more. Recently, 2 of our citizens started an initiative to take a look at taxes and to come up with a program to level the field and make the taxes fair for everyone. This analysis was sent upstate to RIPEC, and it came back. And if I read the analysis correctly, it looked like it reduced our total income significantly. But the other thing that I thought was flawed in it, it shifted the responsibility of taxes from the better off to the middle class and lower class. And I find that inherently unfair. We should all be taxed appropriately and evenly. So, secondly, the biggest consumer of our taxes are our schools. And I think we could all agree it's our responsibility, and has been since this country was founded, to maintain a very successful school system. But most of our tax dollars in our budget go to the schools. And sometimes I'm not convinced we're getting as much from that dollar amount as we should. And again, I'm not an expert on education. Mrs. Von Villis is. But when I look at our test scores each year, I don't think they're where they should be. Now, this is just my opinion. I don't want anybody mad at me or throwing bricks, but are we getting what we should get from our investment? That's a question, and I think the council might want to look at that in another way. Maybe we need somebody to analyze that. I'm concerned about it. And lastly, back in 2009, when it became apparent that the town was going to purchase land that was available from the Navy BRAC, the council asked the planning board to come up and analyze potential uses for the property in the West Main Road corridor. And we did that the normal way we do it. We had a series of public hearings. We came up with some ideas. We got money from the council to come up with a proposal. The proposal was approved by the planning board. Again, it was vetted at a public hearing at the planning board level. It was sent to the council. It was approved. It's sitting in the comprehensive plan right now. My opinion is we need to act on that because our population is getting smaller and older. And the current tax base is coming from the residential side is not going to get bigger. It's probably going to get smaller. And I believe that corridor offers us a real opportunity to increase our commercial base. I think we've already had a lot of interest in some of the properties. It's on a major bus line. So I encourage you to maybe dust that plan off. If you think it needs to be upgraded or changed, bring it back to the planning board. We'll go through our routine public hearings and bring it back to you. But I think it's vitally important to the town that we have pretty good in our planning and predicting for the future. We need to continue in that mode. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Mr. Weber.
Mr. Weber.
Thanks,
Okay, Lawrence Frank. Lawrence?
Lawrence Frank, 8 O'Donnell Road. Property taxes are assessed in 2 broad categories, residential and commercial. Residential can be broken into the following categories: homeowners who live here year-round, homeowners who live here only part-time, rental properties owned by businesses, rental properties owned by year-round residents, and rental properties owned by out-of-state residents. Homeowners who live here year-round pay property taxes, income taxes, and contribute to the economic health of the local economy. Homeowners who live here only part-time, many times less than a month a year, contribute property taxes. They do not pay income taxes and contribute little to the economic health of the local economy. Their homes, which I have characterized as ghost houses, detract from the social fabric of the town. Homes that could be occupied by year-round by income-paying families are now empty. Rental properties owned by businesses, many who pay the residential rate, take advantage of tax schemes that provide them with income tax benefits that leaves them with a reportable tax loss, even though their bank accounts continue to grow. Rental properties owned by year-round residents have the same advantage of those owned by businesses. They pay residential rate on their rental property, get income from those properties, and yet are able to get deductions on their tax returns every year that year-round homeowners can only dream about. Rental properties owned by out-of-state residents have the same advantages as those owned by year-round residents. However, not living here means they are less accountable for any problems with tenants than if they lived here locally. Rental properties being year-round rentals, such as Airbnb, have the same advantages as those owned by year-round residents. However, not living here means that they are less accountable for any problems what they have with the tenants they live locally. Rental properties being year-round rentals, Airbnb rentals, or any established rental business all generate income for their owners. They allow income to be generated with limited tax consequences. They are businesses, yet they pay properties are taxed at the residential rate. This needs to change. Any property in Middletown that derives income from rent should be taxed at the commercial rate. The one residential category not addressed is those homes that are occupied for only a short time every year. This is what I propose. The residential property rate should be raised, and at the same time, all year-round resident homeowners would be eligible for tax relief equal to the increase of their property tax. Year-round homeowners would be guaranteed this tax relief as long as they owned and lived in their homes. This relief would be in addition to any elderly or military tax relief they now receive. Over 50% of the housing stock in Middletown are rentals, a percentage that is increasing yearly. There is a large pool of money that the town should access. The council should direct the town administrator, the finance director, and the tax assessor to determine the number and type of rentals there are in Middletown. From that study, the town can fully understand the financial impact of the tax proposals that I've spoken about. The dollar amount would be substantial. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Frank. Go ahead.
Mr. Frank, I have a question about one of your proposals. I just want to make sure I understand it. It's on the second page, the first thing you propose. So you're saying that the residential property tax rate should be raised, and at the same time, all year-round resident homeowners would be eligible for tax relief equal to the increase in their property tax.
That's
So, just so I understand it, you're saying the people that don't live here year-round, that rate should go up at a different rate?
Yes,
And the people that live here year-round should realize those savings?
that's correct. And
So
my hope is that by instituting this proposal, the tax receipts increase will actually allow for the residential rate to go down in the long term, because I believe there's a lot of money out there in these rental properties that could be accessed by the town.
Similar to the homestead.
It's exactly like the homestead. Exactly.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah, and I mean, I know, Sean, just verified, I know a few years ago it was, we're at 47% and 53% stick in my mind as far as rentals. And I can't remember if it was 53% year-round and 47% rentals or vice versa. Not that it matters, I mean, it's close, but it may have changed since that dynamic, since we talked a couple of years ago about this.
Yes, it's the spread between rentals and owner-occupied, or it's as you described. I don't think we have a real sense of what's seasonal at this point in time.
Yeah.
One of the things that this assessor and I have been looking at billing addresses, trying to maybe infer how to break out
Bless you.
rentals from owner-occupied based on where the bills are going, those type of things. But we don't really have anything solid to base that on right now.
Yeah, so I know that similar to this, a few years back, I had you look at, my cousin had came to me, he bought a house in Vermont, and his neighbor came over and thanked him, introduced himself and thanked him for being an out-of-state resident, because they pay a different tax rate, and that difference goes directly to the school. So, similar proposal, a little bit different variety to it, but I think, Sean, at the time, Vermont was the only state in the country that did it, I think. That's the answer I got, so.
Mr. President, can I just make a statement?
Counselor Toronto.
Folks just said that was like that's like homestead.
It is.
Homestead is giving an exemption to the residents, the full-time resident. This is raising taxes on the people who are renting. So you're raising the taxes on the people who are renting. Homestead is giving an exemption to the homeowner. That's the way that works.
I don't think that's correct. I think what you're doing is raising the rate on all residential properties
So you want to raise taxes on them,
and then giving an exemption to,
and that would generate more revenue in hopes that it'll fall to the bottom
Right,
line. But
and-
as
and
Paul
it-
just pointed out, you could defer that revenue to some other, to the school or to roads or whatever.
Well, the reason I said school is because of, as Mr. Weber said, I think at some point in time, it was 67 to 69 cents of every tax dollar went to schools. So whether that should still be in that ballpark, I'm not sure if that's still accurate.
56.
So,
56%.
no, I think it's higher than that.
Yeah.
But,
Let's move on.
and I should point out that the increase in the residential rate is only going to apply in this proposal to out-of-state part-time
Right.
homeowners. What I'm proposing is all rentals be taxed at the commercial rate,
All
because they are
Right.
money-making enterprises, and they have the ability to have huge federal and state tax deductions that often result in them having not only no income tax, but tax losses, which they can then deduct from their regular income.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Frank.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Bagwell, John Bagwell.
Okay, thank you. John Bagwell, 587 Tuckerman Avenue, Middletown. Before I offer my proposals in response to your suggestions for, or requests for ways to generate tax revenue without adding the burden on homeowners, I'm watching.
Generate revenue, not
Pardon me?
tax revenue, just
Tax-
generate
no,
revenue.
I'm sorry, tax revenue. Okay.
Well, revenue.
First of all, I'd like to say that we know that this area is becoming an attractive vacation destination for short-term visitors as well as second home buyers. Others are discovering what we have known for a long time. It's a great place to live. But this situation has a downside. It is attracting an increasing number of buyers who are discovering Middletown is a great place to invest, buying properties as second home and as investments for both long-term and short-term rentals, for example, Airbnb types. This is driving up the price of houses. Great for the one who wants to sell, but not so good for the family looking for a home as a primary residence. Middletown is becoming less affordable. My proposals are designed to address this issue by helping those who use their homes as their residence, especially those who use it as their primary residence, to have some modification of their taxes. Now let me get down to my specific proposals. Frankly, they're a bit like the proposals that were just made. Just a second, I just left. I think. Anyway, first suggestion is that we should tax at the commercial rate, which in this current fiscal year is $18.71 per thousand of assessed value. Income producing or investment properties that are now taxed at the residential rate. This would be about a 30% increase in the tax rate. Now, properties impacted, residential properties per the zoning code that are not the residents, part-time or primary, of the owners, but are in fact income-producing / investment properties. That would mean rental properties, houses, and Airbnb types. Now, this would be the property tax will conform to the way the property is used. It's also fair. Apartment buildings, rental units are taxed at the commercial rate. Why shouldn't a rental house be taxed as commercial? Hotels are taxed at the commercial rate. Why shouldn't Airbnbs in competition with hotels be taxed as commercial? So that's the focus. Much of it is much like the last comments made. Second is, this is nickels and dimes. but it's in fairness. Hotels pay tax on their furniture and fixtures. Why shouldn't Airbnbs be paying taxes on their furniture and fixtures? The third thing is, and again, I'm not sure, maybe this wasn't within the area that you looked at, which you asked us to comment on, but the amount paid for licenses, permits, fines, and fees, some have been in place for a long time, some get reviewed periodically. Last year it amounted to almost $1,900,000, or only 3% of the non-school revenue. A 20% increase in these would add about $335,000 to the total revenue. In terms of total, not much. In terms of an individual amount, you're looking for amounts a lot smaller than that. Now the question is, okay, should we be making a difference between the second home buyer and the one who comes here as their primary residence? And frankly, I know that the tax plan originally that we've heard at a recent meeting was focused originally on helping people whose homes were their primary residence. I'm urging that the town adopt the homestead exemption as residential properties occupied by all families whose home is their primary residence. And secondly, I would suggest that the town liberalize what it has now in place, a tax freeze, but liberalize the provisions to permit long-term elderly residents on fixed incomes to defer property taxes through a tax lien, kind of like a reverse mortgage, to be paid when the property is sold. Obviously, this would not apply to houses that are under owned by an estate, but has to be owned by an owner, because if it was owned by an estate of some sort or a trust, it would never get sold. So a house owned by an individual, just liberalize the provisions, and so a few people that are really stretched can use it. And that's the end of my 5 minutes, and thanks
I
very
have a
much.
question for him, please.
Counselor Toronto?
Thank you.
Okay.
Just a quick question.
Okay.
There is a tax freeze already in Middletown. If you're a senior and you have a certain income, you can have your taxes frozen,
I understand that.
and then you can pay when you leave the home.
I understand.
So that's in place. So
That
one
is
of your
in place
two-
now.
One of your two has already been answered.
Pardon me?
That second one on your list is actually in place already.
Well, I understand that. So I said to George Durgan, do many people take advantage of it? He said the income levels, I may have misunderstood him, but he said they're pretty much the poverty level. I mean, it's bizarre.
Right, and so we should add in there, based on income as well and where
Well,
that should be at, right?
You're right,
And
but
then,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
so, and it's the same with our senior exemptions. They're at poverty level as well, and I propose we double them. That'll be in my next campaign. But I got a quick question for you, though. Do you think increasing taxes on a rental property will increase the rent?
I think rents are market determined. And I think what it'll do is increase the cost of owning the house and make, for the potential buyer, pay a lower price for the house. Because what you pay for a house is a combination of your principal, interest, and taxes. And I don't think just because the cost of owning a house, if as an investor, goes up, you automatically can raise the rent. Rents are market determined, not determined so much by cost. So it might, but it also may not.
Well, right now, rentals aren't affordable currently, today. If you ask the average person, they would say, I've looked for a rental property and I'm moving to Portsmouth or Tiverton, or I can't afford to live rent in Middletown,
You're right.
right? So I'm just concerned by raising taxes on those property owners who already own it.
Yeah,
They will raise the price. I mean, on short term, we raised $50 per room already for short-term rentals. And you're looking, and the state charges 6 to 7% on those rentals. And now you're proposing that we add more taxes to those rentals.
yeah, I think as you increase the cost of owning a house to rent, you're going to, a person buying that property will pay less. Because
That's not happening in town. That's not reality. They're going to sell the property and someone's going to buy it from out of state and they're going to come in and do something with it.
Well, then that's fine. If that's what
So
they want to
address-
do,
so I'm
we
just
ought to
gonna put
make
that
the
out.
cost. They ought to be paying a tax at the commercial rate because that's what it is. It is a commercial. Now if it raises the rent, and they can do that, if they could raise the rent, they would raise the rent. People raise the rents to what the market will bear. And the fact you raise the cost, they might raise the rent. If they're gonna raise the rent, they're gonna raise it anyway. I think
Okay.
the question is, what's the right way to tax a commercial property? And we have a commercial tax.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Babcock.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Council
John.
Lombardi, you want to make a comment?
Yes, so to John's point, and when we talk about rentals, one of the reasons why young families who can't afford the rents aren't renting in Middletown is because if you talk to the people in the real estate business, they will tell you that the inventory is dwindling. And the reason the inventory is dwindling is because we're finding more and more short-term rentals. They're taking the long-term rentals, the ones that were out there, and they're going after the quick buck, and they're taking them off the market. There's not as many out there as there used to be. And I talked to some young families who can absolutely afford a rent in Middletown. They can't afford to buy in Middletown, again, because the affordable housing in Middletown is just not there. The inventory is not there. I can give you an example right now. I know a young fella, he was born and raised in Middletown, family's from Middletown. He's got a great job in Middletown. He can pay a $2,000 rent, a couple of bedrooms, starting a new family, just got married. And he bought a house in North Kingston. He didn't want to, he did. And he did because he couldn't find one here. He wanted to live in his hometown. And what's happening is there isn't enough inventory out there for a kid like that to start out and make things the way it should be, and maybe someday buy a house here. But the bottom line is that the inventory is dwindling in Middletown. We're turning into a second home community, and we need to do something about it. And one of them is, I agree, taxing the short-term rentals and the Airbnbs like commercial properties, number one. Number two, I'm beginning to think we ought to put a cap on them. We gotta find a way to slow it down. Because we're gonna become like Martha's Vineyard, and we're gonna become like the Cape, and we're gonna become a second home community. And that's what's happening here. The other piece of it is that homestead exemption. I put that out there a few months ago, and it got shot down. And I'm putting it out there again. I guarantee you it's coming back. And we'll work it out. The devil's in the details. But the bottom line is, we need to do something. But there has to be other ways, in my opinion, as I look at this, and the reason for this meeting tonight, is to look at other sources of revenue besides putting the burden on our homeowners and our taxpayers. We keep talking about taxes. There has to be another way of bringing revenue into this community. I mean, Rocky talked about development. Good, smart, mixed-use development. And if I'm not wrong, Mr. Brown, our commercial tax revenue has been flat relatively over the last few years. Am I right?
Well,
Relatively flat?
really, all of our revenue,
Revenue has been flat.
Yes.
But the bottom line is, one of the reasons is we don't encourage any kind of development in this town. It's getting frustrating because at some point, we have to find a way to do good, smart, and I used mixed-use development, and we have to bring the public in on it, and we have to bring developers in on it, and we have to hear some good suggestions. When you bring in that type of business, you inevitably take some of the burden off the homeowners. And it's frustrating. Sitting up here, it's very frustrating that we can't even have the discussion. We can't even have a study. Mr. Weber mentioned the study that's sitting in the comprehensive plan right now. Now, I think it needs to be updated. I think it needs to be looked at again. But that sure as heck is a good place to start. It's already there. Do we necessarily have to go out and find a consultant to do that for us? Probably not, because a lot of the work has already been done. And that's what we have the planning board for. let them go back and look at it again. But as long as we sit up here, as long as we sit around and we constantly kick the can down the road when it comes to commercial development in this town, all right, we're gonna continue to put the burden on the taxpayers and the homeowners, and I don't like that. This council has gone 3 years with 0 tax increases. And that's a good thing in a lot of ways, but how long can you do that? How long can you do that before someone has to pay the piper? We need to find other sources of revenue. So I appreciate the fact that we're talking about taxes and we're talking about homeowner exemptions and the whole bit. But there's gotta be a different way, there's gotta be a better way. And I will say one other thing. A lot of these problems don't start in this council chamber. If you really look at it, a lot of these problems start up at the State House. We should be getting more help from from the state. This state is not business friendly. It's not small business friendly. It's not. I talked to a fellow the other day who was a small business. He paid $25,000 in taxes and fees. And he's thinking about moving his business out of state. Inventory taxes, on top of the fact that you already paid taxes when you bought the product, and then you're gonna pay an inventory tax on top of it. So, to be quite frank with you, we can talk about this all day long, but when you have unfriendly business, not business-friendly fees and regulations that start upstate at the State House, that's number one. And number two, the school funding formula is killing us. And somebody upstate's gonna look at that again too. Because the fact of the matter is, you know what? I don't like the fact that we had to flat fund our schools. And sooner or later, that's gonna come to a stop too. But all I can tell you is, you know, you lay a lot of the blame and a lot of the responsibility on the people sitting up here, and that's what we get paid, what's what we get paid for. That's what we get elected to do. God, you know, could never pay for what we sit up here to do. But the bottom line is that a lot of it starts up at the State House. And that's where we all ought to be pushing, to give us a hand here with the unfunded mandates and everything else they throw at us.
Worn out yet?
No, I almost didn't make it here tonight.
All right, listen, I'm gonna get back on topic, and the topic for tonight
That is
is,
the topic.
well, not school mandates and not school funding.
That's revenue.
It's suggestions for additional sources of revenue. And I'm gonna open it up to the public. If anybody would like to come up and talk, raise your hand, you come up. Yes, sir, come on up. Let's go to the mic, please. Name and address.
I'm Kevin O'Halloran, and I live at 22 Esplanade. I paid $55 a bedroom, and I paid $725 for my rental properties. Is that enough income for you guys? I'm going to change the subject. When Rocky and I graduated from high school, there was 1,244 students there. And now there's 622. The Elephant School pays over $80,000 to maintain those buildings. Why can't we move the school committee to the high school or the middle school? Right? $80,000 savings. Right?
Oh, it's a good idea. It's a good suggestion.
Yeah,
We're listening to you.
yeah,
You
Yeah.
make your statements.
yeah. That's all I had to say.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
Thanks, Kevin.
yeah.
Thanks, Kevin. Anyone else? Yes, sir, come on up.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Evan Smith, and I'm the president and CEO of a company called Discover Newport. We represent the tourism office for the 9 towns of Newport and Bristol County. I had 2 thoughts to share with you this evening. The first one is about taxation on hosting platforms like Airbnb. The revenue right now, hosting platforms for a whole house are subject to a 7% sales tax and a 1% local lodging tax. If they're renting a room in a house, which is what's called a hotel comparable, they have to be charged the 7% sales tax, the 5% state lodging tax, and the 1% local tax. The contracts with hosting platforms like Airbnb have 2 relationships in the state of Rhode Island. 38 of the towns get their commissions from the state of Rhode Island because Airbnb only contracts with the state of Rhode Island. The city of Newport is the only town of the 39 towns that has a contract with Airbnb. What that means is that once a month, the city of Newport gets a commission check and the state of Rhode Island gets a commission check for the taxes collected by Airbnb and paid back to municipalities. The data that we see for occupancy in towns like Middletown and the tax revenue collected simply just don't match up. And so I think one of the things that would be prudent for you is to send your voice to the state capitol asking the state to audit Airbnb. I think there's a gap there, and I think that gap needs to be looked at, and that's a step that you can do to help ensure that you're getting the taxes that are due the town of Middletown. A second thought is that this Airbnb issue is an issue that every city in the United States and almost every city in the world is facing right now. We are students of how different municipalities are dealing with this. Every city council in America is sitting at a panel just like you trying to figure out how to best manage this. We are looking at a number of different platforms in America today. One of them is taxing them at a commercial rate. One of them is taxing them, allowing them X number of sales per year before they switch over the commercial rate. As Councilman Lombardi said, some are putting a cap on how many towns can do. There is really no best practice right now. Every town is kind of on their own, but we definitely are students of that, and currently Mr. Lombardi's one of the appointees to our board, and we communicate with him on a regular basis as to what are some of the best practices that different cities are experimenting with. We get a report once a month from a third-party company that tracks Airbnb activity. It tracks how many properties are registered and how many properties are sold. We're glad to share that with the city, town administration. And so you can monitor what that, I think you need real data to make good decisions, and sometimes you don't know what the scope of that data is, and so we're glad to provide that data for you. But this specific point is right now, which is I think there's tax money that should be reviewed and audited to ensure you're getting what you should be getting. So that's my first point. The second point is a controversial one, but it is topical, which is liquor licenses, okay? Everyone is following the great controversy that's unfolding in Newport about its liquor licenses. I think that the town council should look at what the average liquor license cost is of the 39 towns in Rhode Island. I think you might even want to take it further and say, what's the average liquor license cost in New England? And see where you sit according to that scale or that chart of comparison. I believe, if I'm staying corrected, Sean, its current liquor license is $2,000. right? So you compare that to your neighbor, it's a great deal more, so.
200.
I think you need to look at the 39 towns in Rhode Island and see where that is. Liquor is big business, there's a lot of money there, and I think it's a revenue opportunity that the town should investigate and see if there's opportunities there. I'm glad to answer any questions of any
Yes,
council people.
please.
Council Santos?
Mr. Smith, I caught part of your conversation, your statement on taxation. You said 7% sales tax, and you quoted another percentage. What was it? I didn't hear it.
For a house that's fully occupied, meaning that the renter is taking the whole house, there's a 7% sales tax and a 1% local tax.
Okay, thank you. That's what I didn't hear.
And then when you're renting just a room in that house, it's 7% sales, 5% state lodging tax, and 1%
The
local.
5% is to the state?
Just, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Vice President?
Hi, Evan.
Hello, Mr. Rodriguez, how are you?
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you, sir.
So you mentioned at the beginning of your presentation that the taxation on Airbnb, and that I knew this because when I sat on the, was I appointee to the Discover Newport, 38 of the cities and towns report to the state, and then the state distributes that back to the city and town?
For hotels and inns and B&Bs, everyone who collects the state lodging tax, it gets paid to the state, and then it gets broken up by formula and returned to towns like Middletown.
Right, so, and I knew that the city of Newport was the only one that directly contracts with Airbnb. Is there an advantage to doing that?
I think,
Or is it just more clerical on, would it be more administrative on our end?
tough to say. I wasn't prepared for that question, but I think it is it's a threshold level of dollars. When you reach a certain threshold, I think it pays to do it.
Okay.
But you understand what I'm saying?
Yep.
When you get into X number of millions, then it's going to be staff efficient to go there. So there are certain towns, of the 9 towns we represent, I could tell you 7 of them certainly wouldn't be because the threshold is too low.
Right. Okay. And do you typically share that Airbnb with the town, or is that, hasn't been shared yet?
No, we receive it. Evan and I had met and talked about it, and I've been provided copies of it.
I'm
and
sure that
even-
updates every year. I mean,
It's
It
monthly.
updates every month.
Okay.
It's purchased through contract with us, which is public tax dollars, so it's a public record, and it's available to people like Sean for them and yourselves to make important decisions.
So that could potentially expedite the information we're looking for as far as what's out there in Middletown. If we did move forward with a different tax rate for that type of
It
business.
would be a piece. It would give us an idea of where the short-term rentals are. And we also have the data from host compliance. And I think that's
Yeah, host compliance.
sort of where we're, you know, it's something that we're working on internally is reconciling what we believe the short-term rentals are to what they actually are. And I think that's also something that gets reconciled to the AirDNA records that Evan's talking about. So I think we have multiple sources of data that we're now able to tie in. And I think what Evan's talking about, and it's something that's, you know, been an issue since I was, you know, back with the finance director, is whether or not the state's actually collecting all the money. What we did while I was a finance director, I'm sure it's still happening, is if we thought someone was renting and they may or may not be collecting, we would simply report the address to the Department of Revenue so they would follow up on it. The challenge is we don't know what they do once we provide the address, whether they actually go out and say, Sean Brown should be paying the extra tax or shouldn't. But we basically acted as sort of an agent to report that address to the state and let the staff up there follow up to see whether or not they're actually collecting the revenues that they should.
So is the information that Evan provides you monthly, and the company we contract with, Host Compliance, to see who's registered, help us find out who's registered or not registered in town, right? Is a lot of that redundant, or is it, because if it is, I mean, maybe we shouldn't be maybe we can save some money and not contract with
The
these
information
people.
from host compliance is at a very granular level. It's also at a level that we need in order to bring something back to the municipal court as we begin to enforce. The information that Evan has for us is, it's more summarized. It's not as detailed, and a lot of it is, it's about the market itself. It sort of tells a different story.
Okay.
So in one case, we're in the, we're at a very granular level, like I said, and then we sort of come back up a little bit higher and get an idea of what's happening overall with this idea of a short-term market within the town. And I think that's where, we're getting a better feel for where the market's growing, and that's what we're seeing. The market is growing. It's, and it's not necessarily a shift from hotels to short-term rentals. It's just a growth in the number of visitors that we have in town at one time. So that, they complement one another.
I agree 100%, Paul. Host compliance, in my professional
Okay.
opinion, is a very good investment for the town of Middletown.
Just along those terms, is there any more talk, Sean, about the, where they used to store at the Navy, by the director shipyard? They used to have the aircraft carriers there, and at one point there was talk of maybe redoing those docks, and maybe some of the cruise ships from that dock out in the middle of Newport, instead of being boated in, could be docked there, and we could potentially gain that revenue per person. That could be potentially a lot of revenue.
Yeah, I don't think that conversation's continued. The Navy's repaired Pier 1.
They pulled it.
They still use that. Pier 2, I think, is scheduled to be demolished at some point in time. But then the third piece of this is because of Homeland Security, the Navy has been very protective of what's inside the fence line. And that's sort of become a reality that in a number of areas that both the town and state have had to wrestle with. And we've seen, just as they've, pushed things outside the fence line, like housing, which we've, taken some responsibility from the Navy. They are protective of what's happening in the fence line, and I'm sure they would be open to discussions, but right now the main thing is that pier is coming down at some point in time, and otherwise would require significant capital investment, which wouldn't be a local investment. That would have to come from the state.
Yeah, there could be some federal or state dollars that might be, I don't see why it couldn't hurt to talk to them. There's two answers in this world, yes and no. So, my last question, Evan, is you mentioned about the liquor license with our neighbors, the city of Newport. They actually sell those, right? Are those licenses, aren't they sold for a lot of money?
Well,
And then they can turn around and resell them? When
there's X number of licenses that exist in the city of Newport in
Yep.
different classes, and those licenses are basically treated as a commodity, and so they're allowed to grow as the free market would let it grow, which is a unique situation.
Sean, the last conversation that we had in regards to the piers, they made it perfectly clear the Navy was not gonna make any investment down there, if you recall.
Yes.
They told us, and they said they're not gonna make an investment. That's when we were talking about bringing the carrier in, maybe the JFK carrier, and we went through that exercise to try to generate some local revenue. And I think it was apparent at the last conversation that you and I had with Senator Reed's office is that thought won't even be resurrected for quite some time, if it ever got resurrected again.
The ship has sailed.
Ship has sailed.
How long ago was that, though? That's going back like 4 to 6 years.
No, it's not. It's going back probably about, the last conversation that I had with Senator Reed about that was probably less than 2 years ago. And we talked about an aircraft carrier. In fact, Rocky and Evan were involved in it, maybe relocating an aircraft carrier over here to JFK with another entity that was trying to bring it in. They're trying to solicit money for it, private money for it, to bring it in, so.
Yeah, well, I didn't know that. The last update I knew was that it was kind of left out there.
Evan, thank you, and thank you for what you do. Thank you for coming here tonight. And I think just to spin-off of what Sean and you were going back and forth with the our two watchdogs that are kind of watching the Airbnbs, is that what we need to do is really try to define them and try to identify them so that we can move forward with them, and then decide what we're going to do and how we're going to treat them, and how we're going to let them know that we're watching them, so that we can capture the revenue that's escaping us. And I sincerely believe there's a lot of revenue escaping us in Airbnbs. I think it's been escaping us for a long time. It's something that we've been not in tune with.
It's
You
a
know?
complex situation. There's a fairly long list of benefits. There's a fairly long list of challenges. I think it begs the question for municipalities, how each municipality wants to deal with it. And I think data and really just being students of how other American cities are dealing with this helps decision makers such as your help make the right decisions. So we're going to continue to try to help provide important data for you that will help you make decisions. In closing, I would just say that I applaud all of you for having this workshop tonight. I attend 9 different town councils, and this is the first town council that I'm aware of that asked to have ideas on revenue generation, so congratulations to you on that idea. And I'd also like to say that in my short-term 30 years here in Rhode Island, so I'm a carpetbagger by Rhode Island terms, but the town of Middletown really has, really taken quantum steps in terms of growing its commercial tax base. When you look at it from a 30-year perspective, when you look at what's happened here on Aquidneck Island and throughout the county, I think that stats over 30 years would show that Middletown was the most commercial friendly and most aggressive in growing its commercial property taxes, which we all know and understand helps keep residential tax bases in check and helps painful growth in that. So, as you're searching for new ideas, I'd also look back and say congratulations on what you've done for the last 30 years, because I think that reflects well on what your predecessors have done. So,
Thank you. Councilman Lombardi.
Evan, the audit of Airbnb, you're suggesting that we do something, suggest to the state legislature?
I would suggest that you empower your town administrator, Sean Brown, to write a letter to basically the State Department of Finance, supporting the notion of asking or requesting an audit from Airbnb. It's on their website, but only 2 people in the state can request the audit: the state of Rhode Island or the city of Newport. And
Has
so,
the city done that?
to the city, to my knowledge, has not done that yet, and we're encouraging them to do it as well. Until these parties push for audits, I think that there's undisclosed information that's unknown, and it's hard to believe. You all see specific data about what your hotels pay in taxes. You see, when someone's in arrears or tardy. You have no vision over Airbnb properties. You have no idea whether they're current or not current.
And when they request that information from Airbnb, they don't have to give it to them, addresses and the like, correct?
To the best of my knowledge, no, they don't.
And the other thing was the Air DNA. That's the report you were talking about that, you sent to Sean, and I've seen it. That's, just so you know, Paul, that's done by zip code, right? Zip code. So basically, it just gives you the numbers.
It tells you how many properties have been listed for rental, whole homes. It shows you also how many are renting 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedrooms. So it's showing you what's available, it's showing you what's sold, what the occupancy is, and what the average rate. It does not disclose personal information, which is where Sean needs that vision from home compliance, because that's the only one that will give you that data on where those residences are.
I do have one question for you. Are you as involved in Newport as well in regards to the Airbnbs in Newport?
I'm involved in this in all 9 towns that we represent.
So is it fair to say that Newport has minimum rental 1 month? In other words, you're not supposed to rent your property for any shorter than a month's time frame. Is that right?
Newport has different zones that have different regulations, okay? hosting platforms if you look at a perspective from the Newport zoning ordinance, are permitted in some zones, not permitted in others.
But mostly across Newport, you cannot rent your house for less than a month.
I don't know if I could agree with the term most, but I would just go as far as by zone, okay?
And do you think people actually rent it out by the week anyways?
That's why we want to hunt data to try to determine that.
Very hard to find, right?
Yeah.
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 Could be like chasing it for a long time.
Well, we want to get the data to help us understand what the trends are and help bring the playing field as equal as possible, and also look at what towns and municipalities like you want to do to control your zoning ordinances.
Sure.
So if you do not want commercial applications in a specific area, you know, is that the will and the empowerment of a council like yourself to
Right.
regulate that? That's the question that every council's
So if
asking
someone has
themselves
an
now.
Airbnb, for example, and they're renting out all 4 of their rooms, or they're renting out their house short-term,
Mhm.
then we really should be looking at our comprehensive plan in some ways
Yes.
to change that zoning to maybe mixed use. So we could be changing a lot of our zoning based on, if we decide to charge someone as a business, we would probably then have to address what they're zoned. So Easton's Point could be half-zone mixed use. Because those houses are all rented out, you want to charge them commercial, we'd have to change the comprehensive plan. At least I believe that. Maybe other people don't think that.
I wouldn't
but-
disagree with you, no.
So then we probably would lean into mixed use, because people could live there, and it also could be a rental. Right?
Possibility, certainly.
So
The
then they
option is
could
there.
go in, and if it's a mixed use, they could go in and apply to put a different type of business in there. They could say, I'm out of the Airbnb, I'm commercial, I'm gonna put in retail. It's a possibility. So you have to think that all the way through when we're looking at taking something and start to change it from residential to commercial so we can tax them a commercial rate. Just saying, that's some things we'd have to try to identify as we take some of these suggestions,
I
that's all.
agree with you. Councilman Lombardi said earlier, though, that what's happening is that it is market-driven, so a lot of longer-term rentals are now shifting to shorter-term rentals because there's more revenue to be had. And that's
for
a
long.
trend that's happening
If they
everywhere.
if the Airbnb changes, it's relatively new compared to how long people have been doing rentals in Middletown. Pretty new. Kind of new as of social media that's enabled people to put their properties out there and people can find them and they can share their homes. Because that wasn't happening before social media was around. So this is now something that has sprung up, and now we're trying to jump on it. And I hope we don't try to jump on it and make so many changes where maybe naturally it would start to weather itself out. Because if you keep raising taxes on the Airbnbs, those people will eventually say, maybe I'm out. I'll sell it to somebody else who might want to come in and do this type of business.
We're going to continue to share intelligence on what we see happening in the American landscape and the global landscape with the town administrator, so you can see what's happening. Right now, I think the #1 trend that we're witnessing out there is a trend of saying that short-term rentals can rent X number of nights before they switch over to a commercial rate.
Yeah.
Is that going to be the future? I don't know. This
Right.
landscape's changing very quickly,
Right.
but that
That's what
seems
I
to
mean.
be the majority of what's happening with
It's
it.
changing quickly, and we do have to administrate this.
Yes.
So another thing is, like, when they did Homestead in Narragansett, when I talked with them over there, as our tax exploration committee looked into Homestead, it was an administrative nightmare for them. If you talk to the people in town hall, they were like, oh my gosh, we gotta go out there and validate all this information, we gotta get records, we gotta store those records, we gotta post those records, and they gotta come in every year and tell us if they're doing it or they're not. So we have to be prepared to absorb this from a town standpoint as well, to administer all these findings and how we're gonna have different codes for everybody. So there's a lot of work to be done here for some of these ideas.
I agree.
I think there's another point to be conscious of here is protecting the business that we have legitimately here. We have a number of hotels and motels here that are here. They're paying their taxes. They're employing residents here. And at the same time, it's a defined and known revenue source. As far as I'm concerned, the Airbnbs is, who knows? I'd be surprised if we were collecting 50% of what we should be collecting. And I think that's on the high side. I think people have taken advantage of that for a lot of years, and it's been, the burden has been passed
Well, it was just
to the
it was-
taxpayer.
It was just under 5 years ago that the state settled with the hosting platform. Hosting platforms is a generic term. There's a lot of them. The largest of them is Airbnb. But it was just under 5 years ago that the state settled with Airbnb, getting them to collect the 7% sales tax and the local lodging tax. Before that, there was an uneven playing field totally. But the question now is, you know, you can see who pays their taxes clearly if you're a hotel and inn. You have no vision
My
at all
point.
on what Airbnb is paying you.
My point exactly. We know the hotels that we have in town. We know the revenue that they're generating. We know the people that they're employing. Where with the Airbnbs, it's, we don't know. And I don't think we'll ever know the true number unless we make a conscious effort to drill into them and police them and get our fair share of the taxation from them. But thank you, Evan.
Pleasure. Thank you
Yeah,
all.
thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else that has not spoken? Roby, come on up.
Roby Ferry on 9 Cardoza Terrace. This is on a totally different, not Airbnb, but this is on
Thank you.
future development. Ironically, on Martha's Vineyard, they impose a percentage of tax on every house or property transaction, and they take that money and they put it towards preservation of open space. And that's what they do on Martha's Vineyard. And my thought is, why not levy a tax on every new house built or new development? If a person is registered, like a registered voter for the town, you know, and they want to build a house, you would make it small. Just like how you do the beach stickers. You know, it's double if you're not a townie, and it would be half if you were. And you take, let's say it's 1 or 2%. And you put it in like a fund towards open space. You could take, so you get a developer that's doing a large development, and we all know what, you know, they develop it, they leave. You, let's say, tax them 4%. You take the 2%, and you can put it like in another fund to fix if there's a mess, you know, some sort of a safety zone, a safety net for, you know, for that sort of purpose. And so that's really it.
Roby, good idea. Thank you very much. Go ahead, Vice President.
So, Roby, on, I believe the town of Little Compton does that. I think that they put, I think they call it a real estate tax. I could be wrong, but, and every house transaction that's sold, not necessarily built, but sold, or changes hands, I think it's 2%, or it's a small percentage of, that they put aside in a restricted fund just for exactly what you said, preservation of open space.
Roby, if you're going to talk, please go back to the mic. Thank you, Roby.
You know, if it's a resident, you don't place as much of a burden. Like if you're, you know, one of your kids, you know, that's a registered voter here, they have less of a burden than an out-of-state developer, or, you know, they come in, they develop, and they leave. And this way you would be, you know, you would be placing more of the burden on the developer that is generally comes, develops, and then leaves. Just a thought, but.
Okay,
Thank you, Roby.
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Anyone else like to come up and talk?
Mr. President, if I can just add one comment to Roby's comments.
Go ahead.
Another thing that's common or not uncommon in the state is very high-priced demolition permits. of the house is being demolished, then they apply the proceeds from the permit to affordable housing programs. So that's not uncommon in Rhode Island and in the area also.
Thank you. Name and address.
Arlene Call, 27 Willow Avenue. I just have a thought, when you were talking about
Could
the...
you bend the mic down so we can hear you?
When you were
Thank you.
talking about the Airbnbs, we contract the Reval company for a substantial amount of money. Isn't that their responsibility to go into these homes and identify what is there? Just a thought.
No, it's a good thought.
I don't
Maybe
know.
it's something that ought to be mandated.
Can we talk on that?
Go right ahead, Councilor
Mrs.
Toronto.
Santos wanted to go first, though.
Oh,
Mr. President.
Councilor Santos, go right ahead.
May I ask Mr. Brown a question?
You certainly may.
Mr. Brown, regarding the statement you just made on demolition of homes, what kind of a penalty, what kind of a fine would we attach to a developer who basically destroys an historic home? A good one?
I don't know that there's no penalty associated with destroying it.
There's no penalty right now, but could we impose a penalty? Could we start with anyone who destroys an historic home that is on the books?
I don't know that we have any historic homes on the books.
I think that's a question for the solicitor.
You would
Peter,
have-
is there statutes that protect them if they're noted as historical?
Not in Middletown. You would have to, similar to what Newport does, where they have adopted historic zoning and they have historic zoning
Yeah.
districts, and if your house is in that district, you need to get, in addition to whatever zoning approval you might need, you've got to get what they call a certificate of appropriateness to do anything that alters the exterior appearance of that house, so.
I disagree. I disagree.
Okay.
We do have homes in Middletown that are classified as historic.
Yes, we do.
And they have a plaque that was given to them. Paradise School is on the register. We have many homes in Middletown that are on the register. So you're telling me that if a registered historic home is demolished, and it's been on all the Middletown Historical Society's books, that there is no fine?
There's
no penalty?
There's nothing in our town ordinances that would prevent somebody from taking that building down. No, there may be maybe there's some private restrictions or conservation easements or something on some of these properties, but there's nothing that the town has on its books that would prevent that from happening. I know the planning board is looking at doing what's called a voluntary historic district, which would provide tax incentives and tax breaks essentially for people to preserve and maintain historic structures. But to do what you're talking about, which is preventing people from demolishing or altering historic buildings, you'd have to pass a historic zoning ordinance and set up a historic district commission similar to what Newport has.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Santos. Maybe a good something for down the road. Councilor Toronto.
I wanted to go back to Arlene's question in regards to when we do a reassessment. You know, that's a good time to be gathering information. The last assessment we did was actually the 9th year assessment, which means by state law, you're supposed to go in every home. State law. You're supposed to go into every home every 9 years. Why? Well, probably want to see what's going on in the house. See if it's now got marble and maybe another bedroom or a bath that maybe we didn't catch on the maybe they didn't come for a building permit and they decided to put another bedroom and bath in. They didn't know they needed a building permit. Well, if they go in and there's another bedroom and bath under the current system, they would have higher taxes. And that's why they want you to go into every home to see what's going on. Is it a rental property? Is it a primary resident? Has it been upkept? Has it not been upkept? Town thinks it's 2 bedrooms, 1 bath. It's actually 4 bedrooms, 2 baths. So when they came back and said, I asked them, well, you did your survey. How many houses did you get in and how many didn't you get in? 40% of the houses, they didn't go in. I want to ask the solicitor, what is the penalty for that? If it's a state law that they go in every house every 9 years, and if they don't go in the home, is there any penalty?
Well, they have to make reasonable efforts. I mean, some people may not be there. Some, maybe a house that's a second home and it's vacant for several months during the time when they're doing the assessment. So,
Well, I
But
think
I
they
don't
should-
think
but I'm not aware of
I'm
anything
just
on the
curious.
books.
There's
that
no
would-
penalty though,
No.
correct?
No.
It's a mandate, but it's no penalty associated with the mandate?
Correct.
And there's no penalty if someone goes to sell their home and they list it for 4 bedrooms and 2 baths, and you come down to the town hall and it's on the town scroll for 2 bedrooms, 1 bath,
No,
is
somebody.
there any
if-
penalty for that?
If the town's aware of, if someone
They're not
altered the
aware.
house without obtaining a building permit, then there are enforcement actions that can be taken.
Well, they're not aware, but if they come down and they say, I'm selling my house, and you pull the tax scroll and it says 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, and it's listed for 4 bedrooms, 2 baths, is there a penalty?
Once again, if the work was done without a permit, we can take enforcement action, but
Okay, I'd like to know
just
what
the
that
simple
is.
act of someone selling their home isn't going to bring that information to the town's attention.
Say that again?
The simple fact that someone's selling their home isn't going to bring to the town's attention that they may have altered the property without getting a permit.
Okay, well, I'm just saying the record's just saying 2 bedroom 1, and when you go into the house, it's 4 bedrooms 2.
Mm-hmm.
So someone altered the house.
Correct.
So
But they
maybe,
may have pulled building permits for it.
then our records aren't accurate? If they built if they got, came
I
in for a
don't-
permit, they would have had.
You're stating things that I, then asking if they're accurate. I don't know if what you're saying is accurate or
Well, I
not.
guess I'm just going to, I think that the reason they have it going in every home in 9 years is that they've got to really try to get a good feel for what that property is being used for and what makes up that property.
That's the point of it, yes.
They never, we didn't reassess people's properties originally. They were only reassessed every 9 years. Now we're down to every 3 years. And they want to move to every year. But I think it's important that we should put some pieces in place that protect us from people building without getting a building permit. And I think we should look at, people should open up their homes. And if they don't open up the homes, then there must be a reason why. And just do our best, maybe put them on another tickler to say, when they're in town, we should go out and look. Because it's only fair that everyone is being charged equally. That's all I have to say. So those are just some loopholes I just wanted to point out.
Thank you, good point. Councilor Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a statement, something to throw out there along this discussion for long-term tax revenue, but I also got a number of emails today, and I'm not gonna repeat what's been said, but I'm just gonna go through and for topic fodder, put them out there for people to consider. So another idea was to have a different increased tax rate for those businesses that are at a high level of income. Development fees for private development for things like infrastructure, which I think we have some of that, but to look at that again. Public-private partnerships that offer mutual benefit, like the Gaudet turf field, for example, more of that. And sponsorships that might allow private companies to get some form of public recognition through advertising, maybe signage. I know we got rid of the billboards, but this was the suggestion put forward. And maybe, doing something during the season at Statuist Beach was the suggestion. Also got an email that a concern that focusing on taxes in isolation is not the correct approach. Knowing the cause of the issues that Middletown has is very important. Why are people leaving or not able to stay? Why aren't more businesses coming here? What's the root cause of the population decline when new housing developments are being built? People aren't leaving because of high taxes, this resident is saying. They're paying high taxes and not getting the value for the tax amount, is the observation. Whether it's in education or roads or infrastructure, quality of business, parks and recs. So they're feeling that they're paying a lot and not getting that same amount back in services. And they did comment that you need high-performing schools for quality long-term citizens to want to live here. And
You know, I agree. I think long-term tax revenue isn't just one idea or one action. It's a whole package. It's a bunch of things. And there are a few things that we know that Middletown has. Skyrocketing taxes, not just for residents, but also for businesses. Growing trend towards dark neighborhoods and part-time and short-term residents. Poor education test scores. And a beautiful town with a lot to offer. You know, Councilor Toronto and I did meet with Lieutenant Governor McKee this last May and to discuss the educational successes in Cumberland. And at the invitation of the Council President and Councilor Toronto, the Lieutenant Governor did come last Monday. The presentation is recorded and it's online. So the tax solution, the long-term tax solution for Middletown should include prioritizing educational results in Middletown using a proven success method. And why? Because we know two more things. Parents will do anything for their children. And producing educated youth translates into successful young adults and a successful community. So when Middletown creates educational success, it's going to attract families. Families will balance out the senior and part-time populations. The balanced populations will then support Middletown's economy year-round. And this will reduce Middletown's dependence on tourism, which is severely impacted by economic fluctuations. We need more of a base. Companies will then recognize that there's a workforce pool here in Middletown and reevaluate Middletown as their corporate base, bringing in more business. Middletown grows and is prosperous. So it makes sense to consider as part of this long-term tax revenue solution package to create unequaled education for our youth using a method that has proven successful results. And this was described by Lieutenant Governor McKee last week. Middletown wouldn't start from scratch. They don't have to reinvent the wheel. The results are a win-win for Middletown and Middletown students. And Lieutenant Governor McKee told us the next step: prepare a statute. This should be given the greatest of consideration because quality education triggers quality of community. In 2002, Governor of Oklahoma, Brad Henry, I ran across this quote. He said, "No other investment yields as great a return as the investment in education. An educated workforce is the foundation of every community and the future of every economy." That needs to be part of our conversation and of our long-term tax revenue package, in my opinion.
Thank you. I agree. It also has to be blended, because one segment of it, like you just described, what the Lieutenant Governor brought down and presented to us, would be 2 years in the making.
Got to start
Be
now.
2 years in the making.
I
Start now,
agree.
absolutely.
I agree.
But we also have to look at some short-term things that we can possibly do, and that was the purpose of this meeting being put together tonight. Mr. Viveras, name and address.
Anton Viveras, 110 Indian Hill Road. Just to address the education excellence, back in 2005, as part of the Facility Advisory Committee, it was suggested that the school department hire a consultant to put together the best curriculum in the country, and then hire a consultant to look at our schools and see what we needed to do to implement that curriculum. I was told we teach to the standards, the state standards, and what we wound up with was a $123 million proposal for a new school complex. The council has no authority in education except for funding it at the bottom line. And I think that's one of the problems. I have got a complaint about the school department website. It's awful. It's been that way for a long time. It's tough to find any information on it. Maybe they need a tech person. I understand they might have one, but I was talking about, I know it's been proposed that the town take that over and supply the tech expert to them. But as far as education is concerned, it's up to the school department. The curriculum, and as I said, the state standards, to say the least, as far as I'm concerned, it's not up to par. And it's that way throughout the states, except for certain communities that go above that. You can always do better. You can't do worse. And as far as the Airbnbs and the taxes, you do have an ordinance, I think it's chapter 152, zoning, section 16, that says owner occupied, you can't rent space in your home except to a family member. I don't think that's being enforced myself, okay? The Airbnbs, I have suggested register and maybe a 3% tax on the room, just like the hotels and the motels that we have here. But I leave that up to, that's only a suggestion, I leave it up to the council. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else would like to make any comment? Yes, ma'am, come on up.
Teresa Spangler, 1111 Wapping Road. I just want to comment about the businesses. You talked about the West Main Road property and the potential of developing that. I know that's been discussed for a lot of years. When we look about that, about increasing revenue from new businesses coming in, we have to look around and see how many vacant properties we have first. Why are those properties vacant? So before we start breaking ground and building new developments, new plazas, new strip malls, I think that it would be prudent for the town to look at what's happening to the businesses now. Why are they leaving? Why do we have a lot of vacant buildings? Also in regards to the taxes on homes of permanent residents versus short-term residents, I have known some people before Airbnbs became big that were able to rent their properties out in the summertime, go on vacation for a week and get anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000 for the week and help put their kids through college. So I do think it's important to be able to look into that. I think that what Evan Smith said is a great idea of being able to, what kind of research can we get, what kind of data can we get on that. The other thing, of course, I'm going to put my school hat on for a minute as an educator, as a parent of 2 children in the public schools. Yes, the test scores aren't looking good, but that's also statewide. So if you look at the average across the state, Middletown is not on the bottom of the totem pole. We do have an educational system that is high quality. Do we need improvements? Absolutely. But I have a child who's already gone through, I went through the school system, many of your kids have gone through the school system, but let's look at current here and now. I have one that just graduated a couple years ago, and I have one in the high school. Very successful students. So we do have a high-quality education program, and it is important for our tax base, for our taxes to be able to support our students. There's improvements in every district, not just in Middletown. But in regards to test scores, be very careful looking at that data, because the tests have changed. And because we don't teach to the test, we want our students to learn the technology way, the 21st century learning, teaching and learning. Be careful with those test scores of being able to dissecting that data too quickly, because the test has changed 3 times. So now we're looking at SATs as the scores. That's a very big difference of being able to look at that data in a couple years. You cannot look at just this year's test scores. We now have SAT as part of our curriculum, which is a fantastic concept that Middletown has done. I don't know how many schools in the state are doing that, but Middletown is working with our students to help them learn how to do the content of what is going to be on those SATs. So we're incorporating that right in our curriculum of math, science, and English language arts, so that our students are prepared not only for taking the test and getting into colleges, but also prepared for the 21st century of what they're going to do in their career pathways, or in if they decide to go to college, whether it's college or career. So I just wanted to make that very clear about the educational system. We do have a good school system, and I think that needs to be praised of all of our successes as well.
Thank you. Councilor Lombardi.
Teresa, could you come back up for a second? I got a question. When you're talking about teaching, incorporating in your curriculum the SATs, more and more kids are taking the ACTs and not the SATs. Are they incorporating that in also, so that they're familiar with the content and what's on that type of standardized test?
I'm not quite sure about that, but what happened with the SATs is the
Becomes a
SATs now.
superintendent.
Okay, the SATs are now the state test.
Yeah.
So we used to have to pay for those tests, and that was an option. Now the state has, instead of it being the park testing, now it's SATs.
And there's less of an emphasis on the SATs now with the colleges and universities also, correct?
But the state created the test,
I know.
Middletown did,
Well,
which
the
is the
state does a
frustrating
lot
part.
of things we're
I know.
finding out, right?
I know.
Yeah.
I
Build a wall.
understand, but unfortunately.
Superintendent, do you have a
Our
comment?
hands are tied on that.
Sure, just to clarify, Teresa is right. The state uses the SAT as a benchmark for our students, just like the RICAS or K through 8. We do have many students that take the ACT for college. There are a number of colleges that don't take either, and we provide that information to our students. Actually, they search it out. Just want to address one other thing in terms of the Rhode Island standards. Yes, Rhode Island has benchmark standards. That's not the curriculum. It's the standards. So it's what a child needs to know and be able to do by a certain grade. Then we build a curriculum around that standard that's going to get that child to that point of what the child needs to know and be able to do. So the standard that the state set is not the curriculum. We build the curriculum for that student to reach the standard.
Is there a move towards a standardized curriculum around the state?
There
Is
is.
that what RIDE's going to look
There
at?
is. Actually, the General Assembly, one of the educational statutes, has asked RIDE to look at a statewide curriculum.
Is that
And
gonna-
actually, they're looking at some of the work that Middletown has done.
Is that going to cause another funding issue, unmandated?
We'll see.
Yeah, it is.
We'll
That's what I
see.
figured. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, ladies.
I just have one more thing about the tax thing. I apologize, I didn't look at my notes because I didn't have my glasses on. You know, when we're talking about increase, about corporate, businesses and increase in taxes, we have to also remember that businesses have a lot of state fees as well. They have corporate tax, Secretary of State, Department of Health, inspection fees, license fees, employee training and professional development fees. So businesses aren't just dealing with a local tax obligation. They're dealing with a tremendous amount of state obligations to meet all of the requirements that the state puts down, depending on the business, whether it's, public water or whether it's private water. I mean, there's a Department of Health issue. So there's a lot of different things that businesses are having to deal with that are not in big corporate buildings. When you have businesses that are smaller in their own little buildings, they're dealing with a lot of expenditures that are not local tax related. So I just wanted to put that out there too. So
Thank
we
you.
can't put all the tax burden on the businesses either.
Thank you.
We need to balance.
Yes, ma'am, come on up.
Yeah, when were we ranked number 50, the worst states to do business?
Hi, I'm Ashley Medeiros with Connect Greater Newport, the Regional Economic Development Initiative. There's a few things that I wanted to highlight looking at economic development as a whole. But your median single-family homes here in Middletown are about $380,000 a year. Affordability is being able to afford, only use 30% of your gross income on that home. So you have to make about $105,000, $106,000 annually for a household income to afford that. If you do the math, affordability at 30%, that's still a lot of money. You have 31% of your homeowners here in Middletown are cost burden. You have another, your renting population, you need about $1,683 a month to rent a home here, which is about $76,000 a year. It's estimated that 51% of your renters are house burden. What that means is that if you're house burden, that's your house poor. Your money is only going into your living expenses. So how does that affect your economy? Well, you're not going out to eat, you're not shopping in the stores, you're not supporting your local businesses. And so there's really this trickle-down effect when you look at housing. When you look at your, this area, you do have some great paying jobs. 22% of your jobs are in professional and technical services, mainly because of the defense industry here in Middletown. You also have a lot of jobs in Food and accommodations at 13%, retail trade at 13%. They only pay about $29,000 to $30,000 annually. And then your next is 12% at healthcare and social services, and those can pay around $45,000 a year. So if you kind of look at the math there, majority of your jobs aren't able to live and work here in Middletown, and so that's really affecting. And if you are living here, you're paying a lot more and not able to contribute to that local economy. And so when I look at how you can really change economic development and ensure that you're doing the right thing, it's really looking at techniques of smart growth. I really believe in these. This is what's going on across the country. Smart growth really means is looking at using the principles of mixed land use, compact building design, a range of housing, walkable neighborhoods. You really want to foster a distinctive sense of place. You want to preserve open space, and you also want to make sure you have a variety of transportation. The one thing in Middletown, when you look at the pros and the cons, you don't have any type of town center area where you're concentrating buildings. I sent the Economic Development Committee here in Middletown a great document from the EPA that really talks about the cost savings and the revenue generation from mixed use, dense opportunities in building that smart growth techniques to really foster business development as well. Somebody said you really need to make sure that you have the talent while attracting millennials. You want to make sure you have these qualities because that's what they're looking for. So building huge homes isn't really what people want, and they also can't afford a home over $500,000 with the pay. Even your highest paying, which is in those professional technical, pays about $76,000 a year. If that's a one-person family, that's not counting student loans and daycare and things like that. And so the cost is really starting to become high. So yes, our homeowners are getting outbid because they don't want to pay $380,000 because these other expenses are really coming into that. I also think when you really look at some of the other things I think I heard were, sorry, I'm losing my track here, making it more business friendly. Why do we have those open storefronts? Well, we don't have any Class A office space here at all. You want that live, work, play. You want that availability of being able to get a coffee, walk to a restaurant, host clients at a meeting and not have to get in the car and take them. And we don't have that here. And so I think that's one of the things with that smart growth and looking at not new development, but redevelopment. There are a lot of properties that I think you could build around so it doesn't have to be a sea of parking spots, but rather a place where people can live and work and play and be able to really look at that. We also have we're lacking talent, and so being able to generate more people who can live here and be able to get to work, take public transportation is really a draw for businesses as well.
Ashley, thank you. Great
Sure.
points.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. Vice President, you want to make a comment or two?
I do. I mean, I think there's, yeah, one or two or three. I think that obviously there's been a lot of talk about Airbnb and taxes and how to generate revenue like that as far as those businesses that are flying underneath the radar that are not being taxed or not paying the fair share. I also think in the same token, in the spirit of equity is, we have a lot of businesses in town that operate in residential neighborhoods. They're not Airbnb, they're regular businesses. If you're talking about fairness, I mean, we drive by them every day, and we know they're there, and they've been there for years, and it's been allowed. So, I mean, those are ones we should probably take a look at too, because I think, you know, if you're gonna start potentially taxing businesses that are operating in residential neighborhoods, we talk mostly rentals tonight. I think from a fairness standpoint, we need to take a look at all businesses that are operating in residential neighborhoods, because there's a lot of them. And they've been doing it for years, and that's fine, but it's not fair. If they're gonna do that and make that, then they should potentially carry the same fairness as far as tax rate goes, whether you're a rental property or any type of business that you're operating.
Good point.
I just do want to, I want to say one more thing about the schools. Last Monday, when Lieutenant Governor came down, he really caught our attention, it certainly caught my attention as to one of the things that stuck in my mind was that the reasons that Cumberland's been so successful, they have one of the lowest cost per pupil in the state, and they've been pretty successful. The word that stuck in my mind was culture. He said they're successful because they've really changed the culture of education in that town by enrolling and engaging everybody in education. Everything they talk about is education, because we know, as Terry stated, it's probably the biggest economic driver in the town as far as being able to attract families and businesses and that whole cycle of how it works if you have a good quality education system. So it's not about the dollars, it's about the culture and changing that culture. So I think that's something that we really need to. We can put all the money toward it we want. If we're not changing the mindset, if we're not working together, whatever happens in the past, happened in the past. We need to move forward. And we need to move forward together, because if we don't, we're going to end up with the same results.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Silva, you want to make some comments? Name and address, please.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the council. Robert M. Silva, 8 Circle Drive in Middletown, Rhode Island. I've been a carpetbagger as well as Evan Smith. I came down here about 45, 50 years ago and never left, because this is a beautiful place to live and to raise your children and to educate them. I'm not here this evening to give you answers. In fact, I apologize for having no answers. Essentially, I wanted to do a lot of listening to what other people might be thinking about and suggesting, and it's proved to me to be a very productive evening. And I got to commend the council in particular for doing this. As Evan Smith said, very few communities will host a charrette or a discussion such as this and try to pull out from the public itself and the residents and the citizens of the community their thoughts on their place and their home and their taxes and how they can live here. I only will make some comments. I don't have a silver bullet that you can take and shoot this problem and cure it. I don't have a special pill that you can take and it's going to, like a great drug, solve the problem of how do you run a community and how do you afford to keep it reasonable going forward. I will only say that there's been a lot of work done over the years by various groups. The most recent one is Connect Greater Newport. Ashley Medeiros, the young lady that came up and spoke to you, has been hired with her group by the Newport Chamber of Commerce, and it's an island-wide plus Warren and Bristol effort to look at the East Bay and the economic needs of East Bay. There's been a great deal of data put together. I know I attend meetings at least once a month with Sean Brown and Ron Wolanski, and we meet with Connect Greater Newport, and we try to work on things. I would only recommend that the administration reach out to Connect Greater Newport and pull in a lot of the data, the responses from the businesses in Middletown themselves with suggestions that they've made about the difficulty or the ease with which development can take place and their businesses can maintain themselves or expand. I say that Ashley, I'm sure, would be willing to make herself available individually to members of the council as well as the administration and share what we know at this point in time. And you'll find that the conclusions, some of them reached by Connect Greater Newport, is we have the need to educate young people in our community to fill the job openings that exist today on the island over at Nusk and everywhere else, they are screaming for people to come in and take jobs. And education is the key. You have to get involved with programs, as I know the school department has done through Leanne Fenton, who's on our committee in Middletown Economic Development, to do the smart growth approach, and also the STEAM group, where you get the technology and the engineering of kids in high school, and they have partnerships with companies that will take kids in and give them a taste of a development of a career. So education is essential. Terry's correct. Unless you have an educated workforce, you're not going to have economic development. And the other thing you need, and Ashley will tell you this, is you need housing. You need affordable housing for young people to come live and work. And I would suggest that the council look toward its zoning ordinances with respect to multiple family housing and low and moderate housing. I think the formulas of density make it very difficult for someone to look at the community and say, I'm a developer, and that's not a bad word as far as I'm concerned. I've got the wherewithal, the experience, and the money to come in and build something. But they're only going to do it if
Mr.
it's
Silva, I'm going to give you a little bit extra time. Red light's on, your time's up.
I'm colorblind at times like this.
I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not.
So you have to be able to reach out to the people who build things and make things happen professionally. And I can only say to you, without being disparaging, that I was extremely, extremely disappointed when this council sought not to go out for an RFP for $12,000 or $14,000 to have the people who do this for a living dialogue with the community, with the administration. Find out whether the mixed-use ordinance in this town works. Nobody's knocked down my door to use a mixed-use ordinance that's in existence. I think it has possibilities, but it's not the right mix. And finally, I think that Grow Smart is a fabulous organization with Scott Wolf. You should reach out and find out from him what to do. All I can tell you is the key word is moderation.
Mr. Silva, done. Mr. Viveras will never let me hear the end of it.
Okay.
Your red light's been on way too long. In fact, it's hot.
Well,
It's
I
hot.
thank
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the
Thank you.
opportunity.
Thank you. Okay. Vice President.
So, one of the things that Mr. Silva mentioned, I think is very important, was the affordable housing for our youth. So, or young families, or people looking to establish here, to be able to afford it. As Ashley said, I think you got to make $105,000, $106,000 to be able just to afford a home here, and that was at $380,000 on an average home in Middletown. So, one of the things the Affordable Housing Subcommittee talked about was, obviously the priority was the seniors, but we also kicked around the idea about affordable housing for the younger families. So it's the same procedures. You know, seniors were the priority because of the aging of our community, but that's also something we should really take a look at. Because we're looking at seniors today, at some point in time, that's going to change, and if we want to change what's the dynamics that are happening in this town, that's something we really, really need to look at. If we want to keep our own here, if we want families to be able to come here, we've got to have a good educational system, we've got to have good affordable housing for these people to start and get established here. So I think it's a good point you brought up, Mr. Silva, and I think it's something that we did kick around, but we didn't bring it forward because we decided to tackle the senior housing first. But it's the same process. There's similar monies involved there. It's something we can certainly take a look at.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, in closing, I want to thank everybody for coming here tonight. We vetted some great ideas. You brought some great ideas to us, and I know we've received, I have, and I'm certainly confident that my colleagues have also been receiving emails in regards to suggestion. You know, we recognize that population is reducing, and it's getting older. And I've said this for many years sitting up here. It's a formula for disaster. However, we're gonna get through it. We're gonna generate some additional revenue. Middletowners have always been committed and have paid attention and have planned for the future. And that is something that we're gonna continue to do. And that's part of the reason why we had the meeting tonight. We wanna look forward. We wanna learn from our mistakes in the past. And we wanna be able to complement what we're gonna do going forward to ensure that we have a quality of life that we all enjoy, that is envied by a lot of people, and is something that we're gonna be able to pass on to those residents of this town in future years. So with that, Mr. Vice President.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, motion second to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you again, ladies and gentlemen.